On a serene Montana ranch, a family's peaceful morning is shattered by a terrifying sight. A wild bobcat lunging toward their 3-year-old son. Panic erupts as Tom and Carla rush to save their child, but what happens next leaves them speechless. Instead of attacking, the bobcat positions itself protectively between the little boy and a deadly hidden threat. In a heartbeat, predator becomes guardian. Wild instinct transforms into compassion, and a family's life changes forever. What made this bobcat risk everything to save a human child? And how deep can bonds of gratitude and bravery run between wild animals and the people who've helped them? Prepare yourself for an incredible true story that challenges everything you know about nature's wildest creatures. Before we start, hit the like button and make sure to subscribe if you haven't, and hit that notification bell so that you won't miss any new stories.
The morning sun cast long shadows across the rugged terrain of Cedar Creek Ranch, nestled in the foothills of the Montana Rockies. The Anderson family homestead stood as a testament to 4 generations of hard work, resilience, and a deep respect for the land they called home. Tom Anderson, a broad-shouldered man with weather-beaten features that spoke of years spent under the big Montana sky, leaned against the wooden porch railing, coffee mug in hand. His eyes tracked his wife Carla as she hung laundry on the line, her dark hair gathered in a practical ponytail, the morning breeze tugging at the sheets she was pinning. Their 3-year-old son Ralph toddled nearby, a curious little explorer in overalls and a red t-shirt that made it easier to keep track of him against the vast landscape. He was their miracle child, born after years of trying, his arrival bringing a joy that transformed their lives in ways they never imagined possible. "Don't go too far, Pumpkin," Carla called out, her voice carrying across the yard as Ralph wandered toward the old woodpile near the barn, clutching his favorite stuffed rabbit. Tom smiled as he watched his son's determined waddle. "He's got your stubborn streak, you know that?" Carla shot him a playful glare. "And your curiosity. A dangerous combination if you ask me." It was a perfect spring morning, the kind that made Tom grateful for this life they'd built. The ranch wasn't the easiest way to make a living, but it offered rewards that couldn't be measured in dollars: peace, freedom, and the opportunity to raise their son surrounded by nature's wonders. Little did they know that this tranquil morning would soon transform into one of the most terrifying and ultimately profound moments of their lives. Unknown to the Andersons, a pair of amber eyes watched from the tree line bordering their property. Rocky, a male bobcat with distinctive tufted ears and a scarred muzzle, observed the human family from his hidden vantage point. Unlike most wild bobcats that avoided human contact at all costs, Rocky shared a unique history with the Anderson family. A year earlier, Tom had discovered the injured bobcat caught in an illegal trap set by poachers on the edge of their property. The animal was severely wounded, his front paw mangled and infected, his once powerful body reduced to a pitiful, hissing bundle of pain and fear. Despite the danger of approaching a wounded predator, Tom couldn't bear to let the creature suffer. "For heaven's sake, Tom, be careful," Carla had warned as she watched her husband approach the injured bobcat, a thick blanket and work gloves his only protection. "Call Dr. Peterson," Tom had replied, referring to Sarah Peterson, the local veterinarian who specialized in wildlife rehabilitation. "Tell her we've got an emergency." Getting the wounded bobcat into a transport crate had been a nerve-wracking ordeal, but something in the animal's eyes, a flickering intelligence beyond mere wild instinct, had stayed with Tom. With Dr. Peterson's guidance, the Andersons had converted their old tool shed into a temporary rehabilitation space, allowing the bobcat to heal under their care while maintaining enough distance to ensure he wouldn't become dependent on humans. For 2 months, they had watched over their wild patient, whom Carla had dubbed Rocky for his resilience. Tom administered medications and changed bandages under Dr. Peterson's supervision, while Carla prepared the special diet the vet recommended. Even little Ralph, barely 2 at the time, seemed to sense the importance of their mission, helping the kitty, as he called it, by remaining quiet whenever they approached the shed. The day they released Rocky back into the wild had been bittersweet. As they opened the cage door at the edge of the forest, the bobcat had paused, turning to look at them with those intelligent amber eyes before disappearing into the underbrush. "Do you think we'll ever see him again?" Carla had asked. Tom had shrugged. "Probably not. And that's how it should be. He belongs out there." But occasionally over the following months, they'd catch glimpses of a bobcat at the forest's edge, a flick of a tufted ear, the distinctive bobtail that gave the species its name, a silent shadow melting into the trees. Tom was certain it was Rocky, keeping his distance, but somehow maintaining a connection to the humans who had saved him. Now, as Rocky watched the small human child wander toward the woodpile, his keen senses detected something the humans had missed entirely: a deadly threat coiled in the morning sun. Ralph giggled as he chased a butterfly, his stuffed rabbit dragging in the dirt behind him. The colorful insect led him on a merry chase toward the old woodpile where Tom had been splitting logs the previous afternoon. The neatly stacked wood created perfect hiding spots for all sorts of fascinating creatures that captured the toddler's imagination. Tom glanced up from the morning paper he'd been reading on the porch, a flicker of concern crossing his features as he noticed how far Ralph had wandered. He was about to call his son back when something at the forest's edge caught his attention, a blur of movement, a tawny form streaking across the open ground between the trees and the yard. "Ralph!" Tom shouted, dropping his coffee mug with a crash as he recognized the approaching animal. Carla spun around, a clothespin still in her hand, her eyes widening in horror as she spotted the bobcat racing toward their son. Time seemed to slow as Tom leaped off the porch, his boots pounding across the dirt yard, his heart hammering in his chest. But he knew with dreadful certainty that he was too far away, that he couldn't reach Ralph before the bobcat did. Ralph turned at the sound of his father's shout, his small face registering confusion rather than fear, unaware of the danger bearing down on him. The bobcat, Rocky, covered the ground with astonishing speed, powerful muscles propelling him forward in a flash of fur and determination. "No!" Carla screamed as the bobcat reached their son. In a lightning-fast movement, Rocky seized the back of Ralph's overalls in his teeth and yanked the child backward, away from the woodpile. The toddler toppled onto his bottom with a startled cry, his stuffed rabbit flying from his hand. Tom was still running, his vision tunneling with fear and fury, when something stopped him in his tracks. The bobcat hadn't attacked Ralph. Instead, it positioned itself between the child and the woodpile, its back arched, fur bristling, facing not the boy but something else. A menacing rattle cut through the morning air. Tom froze, recognition dawning with horrifying clarity. There, partially hidden beneath the woodpile where Ralph had been about to reach, was a large timber rattlesnake, its distinctive diamond-patterned body coiled tightly, head raised, rattle vibrating in warning. The bobcat, Rocky, snarled at the snake, keeping himself between the reptile and the toddler, who was now crying in confusion and fear. "Don't move, Ralph," Tom called, trying to keep his voice steady despite the terror coursing through him. "Stay very still, buddy." Carla had reached them now, her face pale with fear. "Tom, what?" "Rattlesnake," Tom whispered, gesturing toward the woodpile. "Under there." Rocky pulled Ralph away from it. Understanding transformed Carla's expression as she took in the scene. Their son sitting in the dirt, crying but unharmed. The bobcat standing protectively nearby. The deadly snake coiled and ready to strike. "Rocky saved him," she whispered in disbelief. The standoff lasted only seconds, though it felt like hours to the watching parents. The rattlesnake, faced with a predator it couldn't intimidate, finally retreated deeper under the woodpile, its rattle gradually falling silent. Only then did Rocky relax his protective stance, turning to look at the humans with those intelligent amber eyes. Something like recognition passed between the wild animal and Tom, a moment of connection that transcended the natural boundaries between their worlds. Then Rocky limped away toward the trees, and Tom noticed with concern that the bobcat was favoring his right front paw. In the rush to protect Ralph, he must have injured himself. Tom scooped up his son, holding him close, feeling the small body tremble against his chest. "It's okay, buddy. You're safe now." "Kitty pushed me," Ralph said between sobs, pointing toward the retreating bobcat. "Yes, he did," Carla said, her voice thick with emotion as she joined their embrace. "But he was helping you, sweetheart. He was being a hero." As they carried Ralph back to the house, Tom looked over his shoulder at the forest's edge where Rocky had disappeared. The wild animal that they had once saved had just returned the favor in the most incredible way imaginable. And in doing so, it seemed he'd been injured once again. Tom knew what he had to do. That evening, after putting a still excited Ralph to bed with promises that yes, the hero kitty was okay, and no, rattlesnakes couldn't climb stairs to his bedroom, Tom sat with Carla on the porch, a rifle across his knees and a troubled expression on his face. "You're going to look for him, aren't you?" Carla asked, knowing her husband too well to mistake his intentions. Tom nodded. "He's hurt, Carla. After what he did for Ralph today, I can't just leave him out there suffering." Carla reached over to squeeze his hand. "I know. I'd do the same." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the events of the day settling around them like the dusk that gradually dimmed the landscape. "It's remarkable, isn't it?" Carla finally said. "A wild animal remembering kindness, returning it in a way that saved our son's life. It goes against everything we're taught about wild predators." Tom considered this. Dr. Peterson always said Rocky was exceptional. Maybe he imprinted on us somehow during his rehabilitation. Or maybe he trailed off, unsure how to articulate the feeling that had been growing in him since the moment he recognized Rocky standing guard over Ralph. Maybe what? Maybe there's something more to the connections we form than we understand, Tom finished. Something that crosses the boundaries we think exist between ourselves and the natural world. Carla smiled at her usually practical husband's philosophical turn. "Whatever it is, I'm grateful for it. And I hope you find him." The following morning, Tom set out at dawn, following the faint tracks Rocky had left behind. Years of hunting and tracking served him well as he moved through the forest, reading the subtle signs of the bobcat's passage, a disturbed patch of leaves, a tuft of fur caught on a bramble, the occasional paw print in a patch of soft earth. The trail led him deeper into the woods than he had expected, up into the rocky outcroppings that gave their ranch its name. By midday, Tom was beginning to lose hope when he noticed a dark opening in the rocks ahead, a small cave partially hidden by overgrowth. Something about it drew his attention, an instinct he had learned to trust in his years on the land. "Rocky," he called softly, approaching the cave entrance with caution. "You in there, buddy?" A low growl answered him, and in the shadows of the cave, Tom could make out the gleam of amber eyes. He unslung his pack carefully, taking out the raw chicken he had brought as an offering and the emergency medical kit Dr. Peterson had given them during Rocky's initial rehabilitation. "I'm not here to hurt you," Tom said, keeping his voice low and soothing as he had during those weeks of nursing the bobcat back to health. "I just want to help." Like before, he placed the chicken at the cave entrance and backed away, settling himself on a rock several yards distant. There he waited, patient as only a man accustomed to the rhythms of the natural world could be. Nearly an hour passed before Rocky emerged, limping heavily, his injured paw held off the ground. The bobcat eyed Tom warily before approaching the chicken, hunger apparently overcoming caution. As Rocky ate, Tom observed the injury, not life-threatening, but a deep cut that was clearly causing the animal significant pain. "That looks painful," Tom said quietly. "Let me help you, Rocky." for Ralph's sake. Whether it was the familiar voice, the memory of previous care, or simply the animal's extraordinary intelligence, Rocky settled into an uneasy tolerance of Tom's presence. Over the next hour, Tom gradually moved closer, speaking constantly in soothing tones, until he was within arm's reach of the injured bobcat. What followed was a delicate dance of trust and instinct. Tom cleaned and bandaged the wound while Rocky growled softly, but made no move to attack. When the treatment was complete, Tom retreated again, watching as Rocky examined the bandage with curious sniffs. "That should help," Tom said. "Though I'd like Dr. Peterson to take a look at you. Would you let me bring you back to the ranch for a proper checkup?" As if understanding the question, Rocky's ears flattened, and he retreated a few steps toward his cave. Tom nodded, accepting the creature's decision. "All right, have it your way, but I'll be back tomorrow with more food and to check that bandage." And so began a new chapter in the unusual relationship between the man and the wild bobcat. Every day for a week, Tom hiked to Rocky's cave, bringing food and fresh bandages. Dr. Peterson, when informed of the situation, provided antibiotics that Tom mixed into the meat, ensuring the wound wouldn't become infected. "You know this is highly unusual behavior for a wild bobcat," Dr. Peterson said when she accompanied Tom on one of his visits. "They're typically solitary, elusive animals that avoid human contact at all costs." Tom watched as Rocky permitted the veterinarian to examine his healing paw. "He's not typical, document. Never has been." Dr. Peterson shook her head in amazement. "The bond you formed with him is extraordinary. In all my years working with wildlife, I've never seen anything quite like it." As Rocky's paw healed, Tom continued his daily visits, often sitting near the cave entrance for hours, talking to the bobcat about ranch life, about Ralph's latest adventures, about the changing seasons. Sometimes he brought his lunch and ate while Rocky watched from a comfortable distance, the two sharing a companionable silence. "Carla thinks I'm crazy," Tom told Rocky one afternoon. "Says I'm treating you like some kind of forest therapist. Maybe she's right, but there's something peaceful about being out here." Rocky's ears twitched as he listened, his amber eyes fixed on Tom with that same enigmatic intelligence that had first struck the rancher when they met. "Ralph asks about you every day," Tom continued. "Wants to know when his hero kitty is coming back to visit. I keep telling him you belong out here, that you're a wild animal, not a pet. But sometimes I wonder if that's the whole truth. You're something in between, aren't you?" By the third week, Rocky's wound had healed completely, and the bobcat had regained his natural agility and strength. Tom knew their daily ritual would soon come to an end as Rocky returned to his normal hunting patterns and territory. The thought filled him with an unexpected melancholy. On what Tom sensed would be his final visit to the cave, he brought no food, no medical supplies, just himself and his respect for the remarkable creature that had saved his son's life. "I guess this is goodbye, at least for now," Tom said as Rocky emerged from his cave, moving with the fluid grace that marked his recovery. "You're all healed up. Time for you to get back to being what you are." Rocky approached closer than usual, stopping just a few feet from where Tom sat. For a long moment, they regarded each other, man and wild animal, connected by an improbable series of events that had forged something neither fully understood. Then Rocky did something that Tom would remember for the rest of his life. The bobcat stepped forward and briefly, ever so lightly, pressed his head against Tom's outstretched hand, a gesture that lasted only an instant before Rocky turned and bounded away into the forest, disappearing among the trees with barely a sound. Tom sat motionless, his hands still extended, overwhelmed by the significance of that fleeting contact. It was a goodbye, yes, but also something more, an acknowledgement of their unusual bond, a wild creature's recognition of the human who had twice helped him heal. When Tom finally returned to the ranch that evening, his eyes were suspiciously damp. "He's gone?" Carla asked, reading his expression as he stepped onto the porch. Tom nodded. "Back to where he belongs." "You'll miss him," she observed. Not a question, but a statement of fact. Yeah, Tom admitted. Crazy, isn't it? Missing a wild bobcat like he was an old friend. Carla slipped her arm around his waist. Not crazy at all. After what he did for Ralph, he is an old friend. The best kind. Summer faded into autumn, and life on Cedar Creek Ranch returned to its normal rhythms. Ralph celebrated his 4th birthday with a cowboy-themed party that left the kitchen covered in cake crumbs and the living room strewn with wrapping paper. Tom and Carla weathered the usual challenges of ranch life. A broken tractor, a fence line damaged by summer storms, negotiations with buyers for their modest cattle herd. The incident with Rocky and the rattlesnake became a story they told visitors, though few fully believed it. A wild bobcat saved your kid from a snake? Come on, Tom, you've been out in the sun too long, was the typical response, accompanied by good-natured laughter. Tom didn't mind the skepticism. He knew what had happened, and that was enough. As the first snow of winter dusted the Montana landscape, Ralph's fascination with Hero Kitty gradually faded, replaced by new interests and adventures. Tom occasionally glanced toward the forest's edge during his daily chores, but there were no more glimpses of tufted ears or amber eyes among the trees. Until the night of the December storm. It was one of those Montana blizzards that seemed to rise from nowhere, transforming a clear evening into a howling maelstrom of wind and snow. Tom had just finished securing the livestock in the barn when the storm hit full force, reducing visibility to almost nothing as he struggled back to the warmth and light of the farmhouse. Inside, Carla had lit the wood stove and was preparing hot chocolate, while Ralph played with his toy trucks on the living room rug, oblivious to the weather raging outside. That's going to be a bad one, Tom said as he stomped snow from his boots in the mudroom. Thermometers dropping fast. Might be the coldest night of the year. They were settling in for a cozy family evening when a sound caught Tom's attention, a scratching at the back door, barely audible above the wind's howl. Frowning, he rose from his armchair. Did you hear that? He asked Carla. She shook her head, but the sound came again, more insistent this time. Tom approached the door cautiously, wondering if a branch had broken loose and was scraping against the house. He switched on the porch light and peered through the window. What he saw made his breath catch. Carla, he called, his voice strange. Come here. She joined him at the window, Ralph trotting curiously behind her. There, illuminated in the porch light against the swirling snow, sat Rocky. The bobcat's fur was dusted with white, his breath forming small clouds in the frigid air as he looked directly at the door, as if knowing the humans were watching from the other side. Hero Kitty, Ralph exclaimed, pressing his small face against the glass. Daddy, it's Hero Kitty. Tom and Carla exchanged a look of amazement. What's he doing here? Carla whispered. In this weather? Tom shook his head, equally mystified. I don't know, but I can't leave him out there in this storm. Before Carla could respond, Tom was already opening the door to the mudroom. Stay inside with Ralph, he instructed. I'll see what he wants. The blast of cold air that hit him as he stepped onto the porch took his breath away. Rocky remained seated, watching Tom with those intelligent eyes that seemed to hold some urgent message. Hey there, Rocky, Tom said softly. What brings you here on a night like this? The bobcat rose and took a few steps toward the yard before looking back expectantly at Tom. You want me to follow you? In this? Tom gestured at the blizzard conditions surrounding them. That's not a great idea, buddy. Rocky made a sound unlike anything Tom had heard from him before, a sort of chirping call that seemed insistent, almost pleading. Then the bobcat moved a few more steps into the storm before looking back again. A memory stirred in Tom's mind, something Dr. Peterson had mentioned during Rocky's rehabilitation. Bobcats sometimes make distinctive calls to their kittens, she had told them. A sort of chirping sound to guide them or call them back to safety. Rocky was calling to him, trying to lead him somewhere. Tom hesitated only briefly before ducking back inside to grab his coat, hat, and a powerful flashlight. I have to go with him, he told a concerned Carla. He's trying to show me something. It must be important for him to come here like this. Tom, it's a blizzard out there, Carla protested. You could get lost 50 feet from the house in these conditions. I know these lands better than anyone, Tom assured her. And I have Rocky as a guide. He smiled at her worry. I'll be careful. Promise. Before she could object further, he was out the door, following the Bobcat into the storm. Rocky moved confidently through the blinding snow, pausing frequently to ensure Tom was still behind him. They traveled in this manner for what felt like hours, but was probably less than 20 minutes, heading toward the forest edge and then along its boundary. Just as Tom was beginning to question his decision, Rocky halted beside a large fallen log half buried in snow. The Bobcat pawed at the snow and made that distinctive chirping call again, more urgently now. Tom directed his flashlight where Rocky indicated and saw what appeared to be an opening beneath the log, a small, snow-covered hollow. As he brushed away the snow with his gloved hand, he heard a sound that made his heart skip a beat. A child's whimper. Frantically now, Tom cleared the snow, revealing the small, huddled form of a young girl, perhaps 5 or 6 years old, her face blue with cold, her eyes barely open. Hey there, Tom said gently, his mind racing. I'm here to help you. Can you hear me? The child stirred slightly, but didn't respond. She was dressed in pajamas and a light jacket, completely inadequate for the brutal storm, and showing advanced signs of hypothermia. Tom didn't waste time wondering how she had gotten there. He immediately removed his coat and wrapped it around her tiny body, lifting her into his arms. Good boy, Rocky, he said to the Bobcat, who was watching the rescue with those keen amber eyes. Let's get her home. The return journey was even more difficult, with Tom carrying the child and struggling to follow Rocky's lead through the worsening storm. Several times he nearly lost sight of the Bobcat, only to hear that distinctive chirp calling him back on course. When they finally reached the ranch house, Carla was standing anxiously at the door, her relief at seeing Tom transforming to shock as she registered the small bundle in his arms. Oh my God, she gasped. Is that a little girl? Tom confirmed, stepping inside. Call Dr. Peterson, then the sheriff. She's in bad shape. The next few hours passed in a blur of activity. Dr. Peterson arrived through the storm, bringing her medical expertise to bear on the hypothermic child. The sheriff followed not long after, identifying the girl as Emily Parker, the daughter of a family that had recently moved to a cabin about 2 miles away. She had apparently wandered away from home during an evening walk with her father, becoming hopelessly lost in the initial stages of the blizzard. Search parties had been looking for her for hours without success. If you hadn't found her when you did, Dr. Peterson told Tom grimly as they waited for the emergency medical transport that would take Emily to the hospital in town, she wouldn't have survived the night. Tom shook his head, still processing the extraordinary sequence of events. It wasn't me who found her. It was Rocky. Dr. Peterson's eyebrows rose. The Bobcat. Again. He came to our door, Tom explained. Led me right to her, like he knew exactly where she was and that she needed help. The veterinarian considered this with a scientist's skepticism and a wildlife lover's wonder. Bobcats have exceptional senses, keen eyesight, acute hearing. He might have detected her presence in ways we can't understand. But to recognize it as an emergency, to seek out human help specifically, she shook her head in amazement. Where's Rocky now? She asked. Tom gestured toward the window. After we got back, he just sat out there for a while, watching the house. Then he disappeared back into the storm. But I'd bet anything he's still out there somewhere. And indeed, after Emily had been safely transported to the hospital, where she would make a full recovery, after the sheriff had departed with promises to return the next day for a full report, after Ralph had finally been persuaded to go to bed with assurances that yes, Hero Kitty had saved another child and was the bravest kitty ever, Tom stood at the window, peering into the storm-darkened night. There, just at the edge of visibility, he caught a glimpse of a familiar silhouette, A wild bobcat sitting in the snow, amber eyes reflecting the house lights, keeping watch over the home of the humans who had once saved him. "Thank you," Tom whispered to the glass, knowing Rocky couldn't hear him, but feeling the need to say it nonetheless. "For everything." As if in response, the bobcat rose, gave one last look toward the house, and melted into the darkness. A silent guardian returning to his wild domain, connected to the human world by bonds of kindness, trust, and a remarkable intelligence that bridged the ancient divide between man and nature. In the years that followed, the Andersons would occasionally glimpse Rocky near their property, watching Ralph play from a safe distance, observing Tom's work around the ranch, sometimes appearing suddenly during moments of danger or difficulty, as if guided by some sixth sense. The bobcat never again entered their home or permitted the familiar contact of those healing weeks, maintaining the necessary distance of a wild creature. But he remained a presence in their lives, a reminder of the unexpected connections that could form when humans approach the natural world not with dominance, but with respect, not with fear, but with compassion. And on winter nights when the Montana wind howled around the eaves of Cedar Creek Ranch, the Anderson family slept peacefully, knowing that somewhere in the darkness, a silent guardian kept watch, a wild spirit bound to them by acts of mutual kindness that had, improbably but undeniably, saved the lives of two children and forged a bond that transcended the ordinary boundaries between humans and the natural world they shared.
In the heart of a fading Texan afternoon, the world seemed to hold its breath between the known and the wild. The soft murmur of the wind and the distant echo of a troubled road set the stage for a story not just of rescue, but of rebirth. It was here, amid the gentle decay of twilight, that fate revealed a fragile spark. A tiny bobcat kitten, lost in the vast interplay of survival and sorrow. When Peyton Mitchell agreed to take in a tiny orphan bobcat for just a few days, she had no idea how much her life was about to change. What happened next shocked wildlife experts and changed Peyton's life forever. Before we start, hit the like button and make sure to subscribe if you haven't, and hit that notification bell so that you won't miss any new stories.
The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the porch of Peyton Mitchell's small ranch home on the outskirts of Cedar Creek, Texas. At 25, Peyton had already established herself as someone the locals turned to when wildlife was in trouble. Her modest home sat on 3 acres of land bordered by dense woods, creating a buffer between civilization and the wild creatures she'd grown to love since childhood. Peyton had just returned from her shift at the local veterinary clinic where she worked as a technician when her phone buzzed. The name Mitch flashed across the screen. Mitchell Harrison was a game warden and longtime family friend who knew of Peyton's soft spot for animals in distress. "Hey Mitch, what's up?" Peyton tucked the phone between her ear and shoulder as she unlaced her work boots. "Peyton, I need your help." Mitch's voice was tight with urgency. "We've got a situation with a bobcat kitten. Mother was hit on County Road 27 this morning. She didn't make it." Peyton's heart sank. "What about the kitten?" "That's why I'm calling. We found him hiding in the brush nearby. He's tiny, probably just a few weeks old. The rescue center in Austin is packed to capacity with the spring intake. They can't take him until next week at the earliest." Peyton glanced at her calendar on the wall. It was only Tuesday. "He won't survive alone that long, Peyton. I hate to ask, but you're the only person I know with the skills to keep him alive until a spot opens up." Silence stretched between them as Peyton considered the implications. Taking in a wild bobcat, even a baby one, was different from the injured rabbits and squirrels she'd rehabilitated in the past. It was also technically illegal without proper permits, though temporary emergency care sometimes fell into a gray area that Mitch himself was willing to navigate. "I'm not licensed for big cats, Mitch. You know that." Peyton ran her fingers through her auburn hair, a habit when she was thinking hard. I know, but this is an emergency placement. Just until Monday. I've already called in some favors at the center. They'll take him then, no questions asked. Mitch paused. Otherwise, his chances aren't good. The thought of the tiny creature, alone and frightened, made Peyton's decision for her. Bring him over. I'll do what I can. 2 hours later, Mitch's mud-splattered truck rolled up Peyton's gravel driveway. He emerged carrying a small animal crate draped with a towel. Even before he reached the porch, Peyton could hear the distressed mewling from inside. He's scared out of his mind, Mitch said, his weathered face creased with concern. Hasn't eaten since we found him, as far as we can tell. Peyton led him into the house, clearing space in her mudroom. A small enclosed area she'd converted for animal rehabilitation. It was warm, quiet, and safely separated from the main living area. Let's see him, she said, keeping her voice low and calm. Mitch carefully placed the crate on the floor and slowly lifted the towel. Inside, pressed against the back corner, was one of the smallest bobcat kittens Peyton had ever seen. His fur was a mottled tawny color with distinct spots, his ears tipped with black tufts that seemed too large for his tiny head. Wide yellow eyes, filled with terror, stared back at them. Oh, Peyton breathed, her heart twisting. He's so small. About 3 weeks old by our estimate, Mitch confirmed. Too young to be without his mother. I've got some specialized formula in the truck that the wildlife vet recommended. While Mitch retrieved the supplies, Peyton studied the frightened kitten. Unlike domestic cats, even at this young age, there was something undeniably wild in his eyes. A primitive wariness that spoke of generations of instinct. Hey there, little one, she whispered. I know you're scared. Everything's different and nothing makes sense right now. But I promise I'm going to help you. The kitten responded with a hiss. Tiny teeth bared in an expression that would have been fierce if it weren't so heartbreakingly small. Mitch returned with a bag of supplies, specialized formula, feeding bottles, a heating pad, and some paperwork. I've written up an emergency care authorization, he explained, handing her a document with the Texas Parks and Wildlife Department letterhead. It's not a full rehabilitation permit, but it covers you legally until Monday. After that, he goes to the center. Peyton nodded, though a small part of her already knew that 4 days wouldn't be enough to see this frightened creature stabilized and ready for transfer. What happened to the mother? She asked, scanning the care instructions Mitch had included. Mitch's expression darkened. Hit and run. Driver didn't stop. A rancher found her and called it in. He sighed. She was healthy otherwise. Would have raised her kittens just fine if people would just slow down on those country roads. After going through the feeding instructions and answering Peyton's questions, Mitch prepared to leave. At the door, he paused. You're doing a good thing, Peyton. Not many would take this on. She shrugged. I couldn't live with myself if I didn't try. After Mitch left, Peyton returned to the mudroom and sat cross-legged on the floor near the crate, giving the kitten space while letting him grow accustomed to her presence. She would need to feed him soon, but first, he needed to calm down. I think I'll call you Jack, she said softly. After my grandfather. He was stubborn too, but had a good heart underneath it all. The kitten, Jack, stared at her with unblinking eyes, his tiny body trembling. It's just you and me now, Jack, Peyton continued. And we're going to figure this out together. That first night was one of the hardest Peyton had experienced in all her years of wildlife rehabilitation. Jack refused to eat, turning his head away from the bottle and spitting out what little formula she managed to get into his mouth. By midnight, Peyton was fighting tears of frustration and worry. Please, Jack, she pleaded, trying once more to coax him to take the bottle. You need to eat to survive. As if sensing her desperation, Jack finally latched onto the nipple and began to suckle weakly. Peyton nearly cried with relief. That's it, good boy, she encouraged, watching as he swallowed a few milliliters of the precious formula. It wasn't much, but it was a start. After feeding, she gently cleaned him with a warm, damp cloth, mimicking how his mother would have groomed him. He tolerated this with surprising patience, his eyes growing heavy. Peyton had set up a small enclosure with the heating pad covered by soft blankets. She placed Jack inside, and he immediately curled into a tight ball, his spotted back rising and falling with each breath. "Sleep well, little wildling," she whispered, dimming the lights before retreating to her bedroom, where she set her alarm for the next feeding in 4 hours. In the dark quiet of her room, Peyton allowed doubt to creep in. Was she really equipped to save this wild creature? What if she was doing more harm than good? The responsibility weighed heavy, but the alternative, letting Jack die without trying, was unthinkable. The next few days fell into an exhausting routine. Every 4 hours, Peyton would prepare Jack's formula, warm it to the precise temperature, and attempt to feed him. Each feeding was a battle of wills, Jack's fierce independence against Peyton's gentle persistence. By Friday morning, Peyton was operating on minimal sleep, but Jack was showing signs of improvement. He was taking more formula at each feeding and had even used the small litter box she'd prepared, his wild instincts guiding him. Peyton called in sick to work, unable to leave Jack alone for the 8-hour shift. Her supervisor, Dr. Landon, was understanding but concerned. "You're taking care of a what?" he asked when she explained the situation. "A bobcat kitten." Just until Monday, Peyton assured him, though she was beginning to doubt the timeline herself. Jack was still so fragile. "Peyton, that's," Dr. Landon sighed. "Just be careful. Wild animals, even babies, aren't domestic cats. They require specialized care." "I know." Mitch brought all the supplies and instructions. "I'm in contact with the wildlife center too." After the call, Peyton checked on Jack and found him awake, watching her with his intense yellow eyes. For the first time, he didn't retreat to the back of the enclosure when she approached. "Well, hello there," she said, smiling. "Feeling a bit braver today?" To her surprise, Jack stood on wobbly legs and took a tentative step toward her. He was still weak, but this small show of curiosity was encouraging. "That's it," she coaxed. "Nothing to be afraid of." She extended her hand slowly, palm down, letting him catch her scent. Jack stretched his neck, his pink nose twitching as he sniffed her fingers. Then, quick as lightning, he darted back to his blanket nest, but it was progress nonetheless. Throughout the weekend, Jack grew stronger with each passing day. By Sunday, he was taking his formula eagerly and had begun exploring his enclosure with growing confidence. His movements were becoming more coordinated, his personality more apparent. Despite his small size, he had a fierce spirit that demanded respect. Peyton found herself captivated by his wild beauty, the way his ears swiveled to catch every sound, how his eyes tracked movement with laser focus, the delicate pattern of spots that would someday help him blend into forest shadows. Sunday evening, Mitch called to confirm the transfer plans for the next day. "The center has a spot ready for him," he said. "I'll pick you both up around 9 in the morning." "That's good," Peyton said, trying to ignore the unexpected pang in her chest. "He's doing much better. Taking his formula well, more active." "You sound attached," Mitch observed, his tone gentle but knowing. "I'm just glad he's thriving," Peyton deflected. "He deserves a chance at a normal bobcat life." After hanging up, Peyton went to check on Jack one last time before bed. To her surprise, he was waiting at the edge of his enclosure, sitting upright with his tail wrapped neatly around his paws. When she knelt down, he let out a small chirping sound, not quite a meow, but distinctly communicative. "I know," she told him softly. "Tomorrow's a big day. You're going to a place where they'll help you grow up strong and wild, just like you're supposed to be." Jack tilted his head, seeming to listen. Then, in a move that caught Peyton completely off guard, he raised one paw and placed it against the mesh of the enclosure, directly opposite her hand. The gesture, so simple yet so profound, brought unexpected tears to Peyton's eyes. In just 4 short days, this wild creature had found his way into her heart in a way she hadn't anticipated. "Oh, Jack," she whispered, "I'm going to miss you too." Monday morning arrived with a surprising development. When Peyton went to prepare Jack's morning bottle, she found him lethargic and unresponsive. His previous energy completely vanished. Alarmed, she called Mitch immediately. "Something's wrong with Jack. He was fine last night, but now he's barely moving. I don't think he should be transported today." 20 minutes later, Mitch arrived with Dr. Elena Vasquez, a wildlife veterinarian who occasionally consulted with the Parks and Wildlife Department. Dr. Vasquez examined Jack carefully, her expression serious. "He's dehydrated and his temperature is low. Has he been eating normally?" "Yes, until this morning," Peyton explained anxiously. "He took his late bottle perfectly last night around 11. After a thorough examination, Dr. Vasquez administered fluids subcutaneously and gave Peyton additional medication to mix with Jack's formula. "It could be stress, or he might have picked up an infection," she explained. "Young wild animals can crash quickly. The next 48 hours will be critical. So the transfer is postponed?" Peyton asked, relief mingling with concern. Dr. Vasquez nodded. "He's in no condition to be moved. I'll speak with the center, but in my professional opinion, he should stay here under your care until he stabilizes." She glanced at Mitch. "With proper emergency authorization extended, of course." Mitch nodded grimly. "I'll handle the paperwork." "Peyton, are you okay continuing his care? It might be more intensive now." "Of course," Peyton said without hesitation. "Whatever Jack needs." After they left, Peyton sat beside Jack's enclosure, watching him sleep under the gentle warmth of the heating pad. His condition had shaken her more than she wanted to admit. In just a few days, his well-being had become deeply important to her. "You have to fight, Jack," she whispered. "You're stronger than this." The next 2 days became a blur of round-the-clock care. Peyton took emergency leave from work, focusing all her energy on Jack's recovery. She administered his medication, kept him hydrated, and monitored his temperature obsessively. Slowly, Jack began to respond to treatment. By Wednesday evening, he was taking small amounts of formula again. By Thursday morning, his eyes had regained some of their alertness, tracking Peyton's movements as she tended to him. Dr. Vasquez visited again on Friday and was pleased with Jack's progress. "He's a fighter," she observed, watching as Jack accepted a full bottle from Peyton's hand. "And he trusts you. That's unusual for a wild bobcat, even a young one." "So what happens now?" Peyton asked, gently stroking Jack's back as he dozed off after his meal, something he now allowed her to do. Dr. Vasquez exchanged a look with Mitch, who had accompanied her. "The center's still willing to take him, but—" She hesitated. "But what?" Peyton prompted. "There's been some discussion," Mitch said carefully. "Given the bond that's clearly formed and how well he's responding to your care, we're considering alternatives." Dr. Vasquez nodded. "Normally, we advocate strongly for returning wildlife to their natural habitat. But in cases like Jack's, where they're orphaned so young, the transition back to the wild can be challenging. They miss critical learning periods with their mothers." "What are you suggesting?" Peyton asked, her pulse quickening. "There's a wildlife education program that works with non-releasable animals," Mitch explained. "Animals that can't return to the wild but can serve as ambassadors, teaching people about Texas wildlife and conservation. Jack could be a candidate for that program," Dr. Vasquez continued. "But he would need consistent care during his development from someone he already trusts." Peyton's breath caught. "Are you asking if I would?" "It would require proper licensing," Mitch said quickly. "Specialized training, regular check-ins with wildlife authorities. It's a significant commitment, Peyton. Years, not days." "But yes," Dr. Vasquez confirmed. "We're asking if you would consider becoming Jack's permanent caretaker under the umbrella of our education program. You'd work with us to ensure he receives proper care while also helping him fulfill an important role in wildlife education." Peyton looked down at the sleeping bobcat kitten, his small body rising and falling with each breath. She thought about the fierce spirit she'd glimpsed in those amber eyes, the trust he'd placed in her, when he was at his most vulnerable. "I'd need to learn so much," she said softly. "We'd help you every step of the way," Dr. Vasquez assured her. "Think about it. This isn't a decision to make lightly." But even as the words were spoken, Peyton knew her answer. Some connections, once formed, were impossible to break. 1 year later, the elementary school classroom buzzed with excitement as Peyton set up the educational materials. Behind her, Jack waited patiently in his specialized travel enclosure, a far cry from the tiny crate he'd arrived in a year ago. At 14 months old, Jack had grown into a magnificent young bobcat. His spotted coat gleamed with health, his muscles lean and powerful beneath the fur. Though still smaller than a fully grown wild bobcat, his presence commanded attention and respect. "Is everyone ready to meet our special guest?" Miss Thornton, the third-grade teacher, asked her class. 25 children nodded eagerly, their eyes wide with anticipation. Peyton smiled and began her presentation. "Today, I want to introduce you to Jack. He's a Texas bobcat who came into my care when he was just a tiny kitten after his mother was hit by a car." She gestured to the enclosure, where Jack sat regally observing the children with unblinking focus. A collective gasp rose from the class. Jack is what we call an animal ambassador. He helps us teach people about wildlife conservation and the importance of protecting natural habitats. While most bobcats live in the wild, Jack has a special job helping humans learn. As Peyton continued her presentation, she reflected on the journey that had brought them here. The licensing process had been rigorous, specialized training, home inspections, and equipment requirements that had transformed part of her property into a suitable permanent enclosure for a growing bobcat. Jack had thrived under her care, developing a unique personality that balanced his wild instincts with an unusual tolerance for human interaction. Though Peyton was careful never to treat him as a pet, he remained a wild animal, deserving of respect and appropriate boundaries. Their educational outreach program had started small, local community events, nature centers, and now schools. Jack's story resonated with people of all ages, opening conversations about wildlife conservation, responsible driving on rural roads, and the delicate balance between human development and natural habitats. After the presentation, as the children asked questions from a safe distance, Peyton caught Jack's eye. He blinked slowly at her, a gesture that, between them, had come to signify trust and connection. Later that evening, back at home, Peyton released Jack into his spacious outdoor enclosure. The setting sun painted the Texas sky in brilliant oranges and pinks as Jack stretched luxuriously, inspecting his territory after a day away. Peyton sat on the bench outside the enclosure, watching as he moved with fluid grace across the natural terrain she'd created for him. Logs to climb, vegetation for cover, a small artificial stream that circulated fresh water. "You did great today, buddy," she told him. "Those kids will remember you for a long time." Jack paused in his explorations to look at her, his amber eyes reflecting the sunset. In that moment, Peyton felt the familiar surge of gratitude that had become part of her daily life since Jack had entered it. Their arrangement wasn't conventional. It wasn't what either of them might have chosen if circumstances had been different. In an ideal world, Jack would have grown up wild with his mother, learning to hunt and survive in the forests of Texas. Peyton would have continued her work at the veterinary clinic, perhaps occasionally rehabilitating wildlife for release. But life rarely followed ideal paths. Sometimes it carved unexpected detours that led to places more meaningful than the original destination. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Peyton reflected on the ripple effects of Jack's presence in her life. She had recently been accepted to a wildlife management program at the state university, a path she'd never considered before Jack. Her work with the wildlife education program had opened doors and possibilities she hadn't imagined. Jack had settled onto a high perch, his favorite spot for surveying his domain. From there, he could see both his enclosure and Peyton's house. the intersection of wild and human that had become his unique world. "Good night, Jack," Peyton said softly, standing to head inside. "See you in the morning." As if in response, Jack made the chirping sound that had become his signature communication with her. Not quite wild, not quite tame, but something uniquely their own. Walking back to her house, Peyton thought about the frightened kitten she'd almost lost, the countless nights of worry, the moments of breakthrough, and the unexpected journey that had transformed them both. Jack would never be a house cat, and Peyton would never treat him as one. He would always carry the spirit of the wild within him. But in their unlikely connection, they had found a purpose that honored both his nature and her compassion, a shared path that respected the distance between their worlds while celebrating the bridge they had built between them. And in that complex balance, they had both found a kind of freedom neither could have discovered alone. 5 years later, the Rehabilitation Center bustled with activity as volunteers prepared for the spring wildlife baby season. Peyton, now the center's education director, moved through the facility with confident purpose, stopping to check on recent arrivals and consult with staff. At the heart of the center stood a state-of-the-art Bobcat enclosure, home to Jack and, more recently, Willow, a female bobcat who had been rescued from a similar situation 3 years prior. Though they weren't breeding pairs, the two bobcats had formed a companionable relationship that enriched their lives. Ms. Mitchell, a young volunteer, approached, clipboard in hand. "The school group is here for the 2 o'clock program." "Thanks, Emma. I'll be right there." Peyton finished reviewing treatment notes before heading to the education pavilion. Outside, she paused to look back at the center, a facility that hadn't existed 5 years ago. After her experience with Jack, Peyton had advocated tirelessly for better wildlife rehabilitation resources in Cedar Creek. With grants, community support, and partnerships with state agencies, what had started as a dream had materialized into a reality that served hundreds of animals each year. Jack, now 6 years old and in his prime, remained the heart of their educational program. His story had touched thousands of visitors, inspiring conservation efforts, and even leading to improved signage and wildlife crossings on the county roads where his mother had been killed. As Peyton prepared to share Jack's story with yet another group of eager students, she reflected on the unexpected gift that had come from that desperate phone call years ago. Not just the privilege of knowing one remarkable bobcat, but the opportunity to build a legacy of compassion and conservation that would extend far beyond their lifetime. In saving Jack, she had found her calling. And in their shared journey, something broken in the natural order had been transformed into something new and meaningful, a testament to the healing power of connection across the divide between wild and human hearts. The circle had closed, and in its completion, a new one had begun.